Hey everybody, I'm East Coast Pete. Welcome to my show for drummers only. Today we're going to talk about one of my very favorite drummers, Mr. Phil Collins. But in order to do that, I'm going to have to talk a lot about Genesis. Phil Collins was born in 1951 in West London. He was a singer-songwriter, multi-instrumentalist, a record producer, and an actor. Drummer and later lead singer of the Prague Champions Genesis, which would genre jump to pop at the end of the 70s. Collins became a successful solo artist concurrent with his time with Genesis Part 2, scoring 3 UK and 4 US #1 singles. With all of his collaborations, he had more singles on the charts than anyone else in the 80s. Some of his singles were In the Air Tonight, Against All Odds, One More Night, Sussudio, Two Hearts, and Another Day in Paradise. But today we are more interested in Phil Collins, the superlative drummer. He began drums at age 5. He also took drama lessons and became a child actor. He joined Genesis in 1970 and replaced Peter Gabriel as lead singer in 1975. His drumming would continue in the studio, but live Genesis would rely on Chester Burnett to play the drums, while Collins was the front man. And Collins left Genesis in 1996 to focus on his solo career. He rejoined for a Turn It On Again tour in 2007 after a 5-year break to focus on his family. He released an autobiography and began a 2-year tour spanning 2017 to 2019. For all I know, he's still out there somewhere doing his thing. As a member of Genesis, he was inducted to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2012. Back in 1964, he switched from a toy drum set to a makeshift kit his uncle made up for him. Now, as Collins grew, so did his drum kits. His drum teachers were Lloyd Ryan and later Frank King. Collins was an adherent to drum rudiments. He never learned music notation or charts. Now, Ringo Starr was a big influence, as was the mod band The Action. Collins also was a fan of Buddy Rich, who demonstrated an importance of the hi-hat. Collins gave up his double bass drum and opted for a hi-hat. A hi-hat, by the way, is 2 cymbals operated by a foot pedal and hit with drumsticks to create syncopation. Collins' first recording was done with his band Hickory. The name was changed to Flaming Youth. Their album was called Art 2. Released in 1969, it was a concept album about media frenzy about the moon landing. The album got favorable reviews, but sales were poor, and the band toured for a year before disbanding. He played on George Harrison's All Things Must Pass on the track The Art of Dying. Genesis attracted Collins through an ad in a music magazine. John Mayhew and Tony Phillips had left. Collins heard the Genesis album Trespass, and Collins was favorable. He and Steve Hackett joined bassist guitarist Mike Rutherford, Peter Gabriel, and keyboardist Tony Banks. Collins' first Genesis album was Nursery Crime. Besides drums, Collins sang backup. The album got mixed reviews from critics and didn't chart for 3 years. The opening track, Musical Box, was a macabre fairy story set in Victorian Britain. Collins' drumming expanded the scope of Genesis, including a sense of humor on cuts like Harold the Barrel. Genesis toured with Lindisfarne and Van de Graaff Generator. Writing new material on tour proved vexing for Genesis, so they began a 3-month writing and composing stint. Hackett brought in a mellotron and Banks used it along with his Hammond organ in place of the piano. All this resulted in Nursery Crime. The live cut musical box was when Gabriel first brought in the red dress and the fox head to wear, cut The Return of the Giant Hogsweed warns of the spread of a toxic bush from Russia. Gabriel and Collins sang a duet for Harold the Barrel about a guy thinking of jumping off a bridge. The Fountain of Salmacis is about an ancient Greek hermaphrodite. The drum part established a new horizon for prog drummers. During the tour for Nursery Crime, Genesis recorded a non-album single called Happy the Man. It was backed with 7 Stones from Nursery Crime for the B-side. Genesis was not really a singles band, so for Nursery Crime to sell, their audiences would have to see Genesis as a full album conceptual music experience, as bombastic as ELP, and yes, that is what happened. Our horizons were expanded, and as fans, we were to see album after album taking us further into the band's narrative, and art rock had new darlings. In '72, Foxtrot, featuring Supper's Ready. This was the first Genesis album to chart, going to number 12 in the UK. Trespass had reached number 1 in Belgium, and Nursery Crime went to number 4 in Italy, but somehow that didn't count in the early 70s. But success with audiences in these countries would teach Genesis what best pleased their audience. Gabriel appeared with new costumes, black eye makeup, and the front of his head shaved. Watcher of the Skies, an absolute amazing piece of music. The theme was, what would an empty earth look like to an alien visitor in the distant future? Similar to Arthur C. Clarke's sci-fi novel Childhood's End, Genesis had seen Yes perform Close to the Edge, and Genesis took to complicated arrangements right after that. Get 'Em Out by Friday was a comic opera about a landlord with problems. Gabriel adopted a different voice to represent each character in the narrative. Supper's Ready, a 22-minute track in 7 parts, good versus evil, with an intermittent 9/8 time signature. Foxtrot was rated 14th in Rolling Stone magazine's 50 greatest prog albums. The complexity of the music certainly would not have been possible without Collins' sure hand and incredible talent as a drummer. And the best was yet to come, because in '73, Selling England by the Pound went to number 3 in the UK and number 70 in the US. I Know What I Like in Your Wardrobe was released as a single, becoming the band's first top 30 hit in the UK. Themes are the loss of culture as England becomes more modern due to influence by the US. Critics were harsh, comparing Genesis unfavorably to Pink Floyd, Jethro Tull, and ELP. Collins had been listening to John McLaughlin and Billy Cobham on their Mahavishnu Orchestra recordings. Collins was induced to play in even more difficult time signatures on Dancing with the Moonlit Night track. Hackett's guitar licks gave the album a jazz fusion feel, particularly on Firth of Fifth. More Fool Me featured a Collins lead vocal. It was a mild romantic ballad. And where did that come from? Collins and Rutherford were the new writing team for Genesis. The Battle for Epping Forest, Gabriel's lyrics taken from a news story about gang rivals collecting for a rowdy brawl in Epping Forest. And a coin flip produced the anticlimactical winner of the battle. Now, Neil Peart praised Collins' drumming on Selling England, and John Lennon praised the album top to bottom. I saw the Lamb Lies Down on Broadway show, performed in its entirety at Providence's Ocean State Theater in the spring of 1975. I was so jazzed. I would never see music the same way again. For me, Lamb was the pinnacle of what a rock band could accomplish. Peter Gabriel would agree, but the rest of the band Genesis did not. They felt that Gabriel had gone too far with his double concept album. This resulted in Pete's leaving for a solo career. Phil Collins became the singer when the band could not replace Gabriel. Lamb sold well due to a U.S. tour. The audience had caught up to Genesis just as they would morph into a totally different band. The change was not abrupt. A Trick of the Tail, the first post-Gabriel Genesis album, and it was a commercial success. It was less dense lyrically than Lamb. The music is still top-notch prog. Bill Bruford was brought in for the tour. The track Squonk was compared to Led Zeppelin's Kashmir. Collins brought out his artful Dodger persona from his childhood acting. The closing song, Los Endos, became a fan favorite in the new live show. The critics were surprised by the quality of Trick of the Tail, and the album went to number 3 in the UK and 31 US. Audience were pleased to hear Collins singing former material associated with Gabriel. The tours were a commercial success, and Genesis kept going quite strong. In 1976, Wind in the Wuthering, still proggy, perhaps thanks to Hackett, and this would be his last Genesis album. Collins' drums and double tracks, the vocals, it reached number 7 in the UK and 26 in the US. The single, Your Own Special Way, charted in the US to number 62. It was my least favorite song on the album. It was also a sign of big changes for Genesis. The EP Spot the Pigeon, comprised of tracks left off Wind in the Wuthering. The track Inside Out was a high point, but the EP flopped. Wind in the Wuthering was a Tony Banks album. The title evokes Emily Bronte's novel Wuthering Heights. 11th Earl of Mar refers to a historical figure, John Erskine. Rutherford wrote the lyrics about a failed Scottish uprising in 1715. One for the Vine was a Banks song that was left off Trick of the Tail. It's from a Michael Moorcock sci-fi novel, Phoenix in Obsidian, and it went out in 1970. Watt Gorilla, a Collins song, a continuation of Los Endos from Trick of the Tail. All in a Mouse's Night was based on a Tom and Jerry cartoon. Blood on the Rooftops, a Hackett song, was vaguely political, a first for Genesis. Unquiet Slumbers, ... and In That Quiet Earth is the best track, I think. Afterglow was a love song and a disappointment. But Wind in the Wuthering went gold. In '78, and then there were three. Hackett had left. Phil Collins stepped up his songwriting. The single Follow You, Follow Me sounded nothing like a Genesis song, but it went to number 7 in the UK and 23 in the US. Prog was losing out to shortened songs, perhaps as a response to punk rock, which is silly. Banks' keyboards dominated. Chester Thompson had trouble with Down and Out with its complex time signature. It is about labels who drop artists who are past their prime. Undertow was a Banks composition, and it's okay. Ballad of Big was Collins, as was Snowbound, also just okay. Burning Rope found Rutherford missing Hackett on lead guitar. Deep in the Motherlode harkened back to pre-Lamb days with its heaviness. Banks wrote the lyrics. Scenes from A Night's Dream was inspired by Little Nemo cartoons. Collins penned the lyrics. The song combined a buoyant dream fantasy that turns into a dire nightmare, and the music is enveloping. Say It's All Right, Joe is a step back, written by Mike Rutherford about an alcoholic. Then out of nowhere, Genesis is back in full prog bloom with The Lady Lies. One of my most favorite Genesis songs. Live, it was mind-boggling. Why, oh why, did they close the album with a stupid ballad? Unbelievably, Follow You, Follow Me appealed to a wide audience, and prog fans were left speechless. Our Genesis had a multiple personality disorder. 1980, Duke. Banks and Rutherford were busy with solo albums, and Collins, meanwhile, had moved to Vancouver on the west coast of Canada and tried to save his marriage. He moved back to the UK when the marriage ended. He wrote prodigiously. Duke and Face Value were the result. Duke was seen as a bridge between prog of the past and pop of the future. 3 hit singles, Turn It On Again, Duchess, and Misunderstanding were released, and Duke reached number 1 in the UK and was platinum in both the US and the UK. Collins first experimented with electronic drums. Duke was about overcoming loneliness and isolation. Critics were positive for the most part. Many Genesis fans feel that Duke is the last Genesis album, even if they put out 5 more albums which would run from limp to unlistenable. As a Peter Gabriel fan, I was dismayed with Collins for changing the band from prog to pop until I read the biography Turn It On Again that went out. It went to the trouble of finally explaining what happened. It seemed that there were many reasonable causes for the change, no least of which was that prog didn't pay the bills. When Gabriel left, Genesis was in debt to the tune of $400,000. The live shows were expensive to produce, and the more erudite the music, the less the album sold. If Phil, Mike, and Tony hadn't changed Genesis, the band would be over. So I begrudgingly give them credit for their newfound commercial success, called a sellout by many. Moreover, Collins' use of electronic drums had underplaying reasons as well due to Phil's health, including a partial loss of hearing due to a virus. But he got better. But a dislocated vertebrae in his neck was blamed for his decline as a drummer. His hands, the nerves in them, were permanently damaged. He suffers from depression as a result of many years of scathing criticism of his commercial success by peers, press, and proggers. To come back as a drummer would require a huge amount of recovery and practice, and Phil felt he didn't have it in him to do that. He has been through 3 costly and emotionally draining divorces. He has indulged in alcohol abuse, although he did get sober in 2017. Nice going, Phil. Today, he has difficulty walking due to a surgery on his back. He still performs, singing, sitting in a chair on stage. So Phil, I forgive you. You did what you had to do. I hope you can find some happiness. You deserve it, especially with your support of so many deserving charities. You are a great drummer and a great musician, like an athlete who inevitably ages himself out of action. The glory days are in the past. It's up to us, your fans, to get over ourselves and keep rock music alive for the sake of our future. And that's how to save rock, by evolving, by doing what needs doing, by maintaining collections, and by remembering what has gone, especially the good stuff. Collins made a lot of good stuff, and it's still here with us today. Thank you for being with me on For Drummers Only. Next time we're going to talk about Mr. Clive Bunker, and if you don't know who that is, it's the first drummer of Jethro Tull. Thanks again. See you next time. Take good care.